Okunoshima Island, nestled quietly in Japan's Seto Inland Sea, has earned international recognition not for its size, historical landmarks, or advanced technology, but for something far more enchanting and unexpected: its hundreds of freely roaming rabbits. These rabbits, soft, curious, and fearless, have turned the island into a living fairy tale where animals and humans coexist peacefully. Visitors step off the ferry and are immediately surrounded by gentle creatures that hop to greet them, sometimes even climbing into laps, nibbling at food, and calmly posing for photographs. It's a sight that feels too surreal to be true. A small island covered in green trees and winding paths, dotted with clusters of rabbits, sunbathing, playing, or simply watching the world go by. What makes this island so extraordinary isn't just the presence of rabbits, but their behavior. These animals show no fear of humans. Unlike typical wild rabbits that bolt at the sound of footsteps, the rabbits of Okunoshima approach people eagerly. They tug at shoelaces, stand up on their hind legs, and press their tiny noses into hands holding snacks. Their trust is disarming. It's as if they were never hunted, never threatened, and only know human beings as friends. For visitors, the experience can be emotional. Many have never been so close to animals that seem to instinctively trust them. The encounter feels healing, magical, and almost otherworldly. There are no cages, no zookeepers, just an open world where nature welcomes you without hesitation. The island's rabbit population has become a symbol of peace and innocence, drawing tourists, animal lovers, and curious adventurers. People travel across continents just to walk among them. They bring bags of rabbit food, kneel on the ground, and wait with anticipation as a small bundle of fur hops toward them. Children laugh. Adults soften. Even those hardened by stress or city life can't help but smile in the presence of such unfiltered purity. The rabbits have created an atmosphere of calm, a place where, even for a few hours, one can step outside of human noise and into a quiet, shared world of gentle company. This phenomenon is not only an ecological curiosity, it has also become a cultural and emotional symbol. In a world often marked by conflict, cruelty, and overdevelopment, Okunoshima offers a rare example of harmony. Here, no one rushes. Nothing feels urgent. Time seems to slow down with every hop. The island encourages people to disconnect from digital distractions and connect instead with life. Simple, quiet, and vulnerable. Watching a rabbit pause to sniff a flower or nap beneath a tree reminds visitors of something long forgotten, that peace is not a theory, it's a feeling, and sometimes it's found in the softest of moments. Moreover, the island's popularity has spurred awareness about wildlife conservation and the ethics of coexistence. Tourists are taught not to chase or scare the rabbits, to avoid feeding them harmful food, and to clean up after themselves. The rabbits, in turn, become teachers without words. Their presence demands kindness, patience, and respect. Unlike amusement parks or man-made attractions, Okunoshima's wonder comes from what is natural, unforced, and true. It is a living example of what happens when humans choose to care for, rather than conquer, nature. As word about the island spread through social media and travel blogs, its reputation as the Rabbit Island grew globally. Videos of rabbits chasing people affectionately down paths or leaping gently into laps quickly went viral. This charm has turned the island into more than just a tourist spot. It's now a symbol of unexpected joy and connection. For many, visiting Okunoshima is a form of emotional escape, a reset button, a chance to rediscover a version of the world where trust and gentleness still exist. And in the center of all this, the rabbits continue to live as they always have, quietly, innocently, and openly. They ask for little, yet offer much. Their presence is not just about cuteness, it is about hope. In every twitch of the nose and every soft thump of their feet, they whisper a silent truth. that even in a world shaped by conflict and chaos, there can be pockets of peace, places where life slows down, trust grows naturally, and beauty exists in its purest, fur-covered form. During the Second World War, far from the public eye and hidden from the official maps of Japan, a quiet transformation was taking place on a small island in the Seto Inland Sea. While the rest of the world saw Japan's major cities and battlefronts, Okunoshima disappeared from public records and was deliberately erased from civilian navigation. The reason was chilling. The island had been converted into a top-secret site for the production of chemical weapons, particularly poison gas. Behind barbed wire and locked gates, a veil of silence covered the island as scientists, soldiers, and government officials worked under strict confidentiality. They were not just constructing tools of war, they were creating invisible killers. The poison gases produced here would eventually be used across various battlefields, causing silent, agonizing deaths. The project was so secret that even the workers who lived and labored on the island were sworn to secrecy. Many were told they were producing fertilizers or working on national projects, but those involved directly knew the truth. They wore gas masks, worked in sealed chambers, and lived in constant anxiety. Accidents were frequent, and exposure to the chemicals had lasting effects. Many workers fell ill, developed chronic diseases, or died years later from the after effects of their exposure. Yet their suffering went undocumented and unspoken. The Japanese government denied responsibility for years, leaving behind not only physical scars, but also deep emotional wounds in the families affected. The buildings that housed this lethal production still stand in silence. Crumbling concrete walls, broken windows, rusted pipes, and empty furnaces remain like ghosts of a time the world tried to forget. The contrast between their purpose and the peaceful sounds of waves today is jarring. Back then, this island was a place of whispers and warnings, a space no outsider could enter without clearance. Holiness. "Mina," she said, humming a Welsh way. Now, tourists stroll through it casually, unaware that the path they walk on once carried canisters of death. But if they pause, they can still feel the eerie stillness that clings to the remains of the gas factories. It's a silence not of nature, but of memory. A silence that holds onto the cries that were never allowed to be heard. The secrecy went so far that the island was literally removed from maps. Families of those working there were left in the dark. Letters were monitored. Civilians nearby knew something was happening, but no one dared to ask questions. It was a time when obedience to the nation was considered above all else, even at the cost of one's health or humanity. This secrecy served a strategic purpose, but its human cost was immeasurable. Generations later, historians and victims' families still search for answers, for records, for names. What is known is that over 6,000 tons of poison gas were produced here. The island became, unknowingly to most, a cornerstone in Japan's wartime machinery of silent destruction. After the war, the Allied forces ordered the destruction of the chemical facilities. The weapons were dismantled, the equipment buried, and the staff scattered. But the truth remained, buried for decades. It wasn't until much later that Okunoshima's role in wartime production was acknowledged by the government. Even today, there is little official signage or memorialization on the island. The past is not loudly remembered. It lingers quietly in the background, beneath the fur of playful rabbits and among the cracked concrete of forgotten walls. The contrast between the island's past and present couldn't be more extreme. During its secret years, life here was defined by fear, control, and danger. Now it's defined by curiosity, freedom, and innocence. But to understand the full picture of Okunoshima, one cannot separate the joy of today from the pain of yesterday. The island's dark history does not overshadow its beauty. it deepens it. For behind every rabbit hopping freely along a trail lies the weight of a forgotten truth, that this peaceful place once carried the burden of one of war's most invisible and inhumane weapons. The island's silence is not empty. It is filled with echoes of secrecy, sacrifice, and the long journey from destruction to rebirth. Okunoshima was not just hidden during the war. It was made to disappear. The island was erased from public maps. Ferry services were controlled, and access was restricted with military precision. This was not an accident or an oversight. It was a deliberate act of secrecy, a strategic maneuver to protect one of Japan's most guarded wartime projects, the production of chemical weapons. The Japanese Imperial Army needed a location that was isolated, far from major cities, yet accessible enough for the transport of materials and labor. Okunoshima, a small island with a quiet coastline, became the perfect place to hide operations that were too horrific to be revealed to the public. The goal was simple: remain invisible. If no one knew the island existed, no one would ask questions about what was happening there. To achieve this secrecy, a vast network of silences was created. Workers were chosen carefully, transported under confidentiality agreements, and forced to keep quiet under threat of punishment. Their families were not informed of the true nature of their jobs. Even nearby towns were kept in the dark. Rumors may have spread, but no one dared challenge the authorities. The island had become a phantom, physically present, yet politically and geographically erased. It was a place where truth dissolved into darkness, and every act was shadowed by surveillance. This removal from maps wasn't just about physical secrecy. It was a form of psychological control. By making the island officially non-existent, the government denied accountability and created a zone where normal laws and visibility no longer applied. Life on Okunoshima during those years was anything but ordinary. The men and women who lived there were subjected to constant fear. Not just fear of the war raging outside, but fear of the very work they were doing. Poison gas is an enemy without a face. It does not announce its presence. It leaks, seeps, and kills silently. Workers had to follow extreme safety protocols, but even those could not protect them completely. Gas masks often failed. Accidental leaks were common. Many workers suffered severe burns to their skin and lungs. Some were exposed without even knowing it until symptoms began to show weeks later. But the biggest horror wasn't just the physical suffering. It was the silence. They were not allowed to speak of it. Their illnesses were dismissed or misdiagnosed. Their warnings were ignored. They were victims of war, but invisible ones, denied even the dignity of recognition. The island's erasure from maps also meant that it never received the scrutiny or accountability that other wartime sites eventually faced. No reporters visited, no aid arrived. It existed outside the narrative of the war, even though it played a crucial role. This allowed the government to continue production without interruption and to destroy evidence later without resistance. When the war ended and the facilities were dismantled, no public announcements were made. The island simply faded back into obscurity, like a closed chapter that was never written down. It was only decades later that researchers, activists, and descendants of the affected workers began piecing together the truth. Declassified documents and survivor testimonies gradually revealed the scale of the operations. Over 6,000 tons of poison gas had been produced on Okunoshima, used in China and elsewhere, leaving behind untold devastation. Yet even after the truth began to emerge, recognition came slowly. The island's past remains largely unacknowledged in official narratives. Memorials are minimal, signage is sparse. Most tourists who visit today come for the rabbits, unaware of the sinister story that lies beneath their feet. They walk along concrete ruins with their cameras, taking photos of rusted doors and collapsed chimneys without knowing what those structures once contained. The island's silence is not accidental, it is inherited. The silence of the government, the silence of the maps, and the silence of the workers who died without being named. Okunoshima teaches us that erasure is not just about removing places from maps. It is about removing people from history. By taking the island off the record, the suffering of thousands was also removed, their pain silenced by the absence of geography. Today, even as the rabbits have turned the island into a gentle sanctuary, the soil still holds the memory of secrecy, and while many visitors may leave with smiles and photographs, the ground they walk on remains a testament to what was once hidden so effectively that the world forgot it ever existed. When the war finally came to an end, the factories on Okunoshima were shut down, the gas chambers emptied, and the workers either sent home or scattered without ceremony. The buildings that once churned out silent weapons were left to crumble into the earth, and nature began the long, patient process of reclaiming what had been stolen from it. For years, the island sat in quiet isolation, haunted by its past, but slowly growing over with vines, trees, and silence. It was during this forgotten period that something unexpected began to happen. Something soft, innocent, and seemingly out of place in a land once defined by poison and secrecy. Rabbits began to appear. At first there were only a few, but as time passed, they multiplied. The island, which had been home to fear, now echoed with the soft rustling of fur through grass and the gentle tapping of paws against moss-covered ruins. No one knows for certain how the rabbits got there. Some stories say they were released by the workers who had used them as test subjects. Others claim school children brought them in the post-war years for a project, and they were simply left behind to thrive. Whatever the truth, the rabbits found freedom and safety in this strange abandoned place. With no natural predators on the island and little interference from humans, they flourished. Over the decades, they began to shape the island's identity, not through force or destruction, but simply by being present. They made homes in the tall grass, dug burrows near old concrete slabs, and nibbled freely on wild herbs growing where war machines once stood. Their presence was not planned. It was not the result of conservation or government policy. It was natural, accidental, and completely pure. And yet, in that simplicity, something profound began to grow. The island transformed, not through human design, but through the gentle persistence of life. People who stumbled upon it began to take notice. Photos of rabbits resting beside rusted factory walls started appearing. Stories were shared of tourists being followed down trails by curious, fearless bunnies. Word spread slowly, then quickly. Journalists, bloggers, and travelers began referring to Okunoshima by a new name, Rabbit Island. The creatures who once might have been viewed as pests were now the stars of a place reborn from silence. There's something disarming about these rabbits. They do not run from humans. They approach, they sniff, they linger. Children feed them from the palm of their hands, and adults kneel down just to feel the soft fur against their fingers. Their eyes do not judge or remember. They simply see the world as it is, calm, present, without fear. This trust is rare. In a world where animals are often hunted, caged, or studied, these rabbits live with a strange, beautiful freedom, and it is this very freedom that has made the island famous, not through campaigns or tourism boards, but through the quiet magic of authenticity. Today, people travel from all over the world to experience what can only be described as an emotional retreat. They come not just to see rabbits, but to feel something they can't find in cities or screens. The rabbits have become more than animals. They have become symbols of peace, of healing, of a return to something innocent. They hop across fields that once held gas canisters, rest in the shade of buildings that once echoed with orders, and eat in the same soil where suffering once took root. Their very existence is a contradiction, a gentle rebellion against everything the island once represented. What's most extraordinary is how the rabbits, have redefined the space. Where once fear and secrecy ruled, now curiosity and joy take their place. They did not change the island with power or resistance. They changed it by living, by trusting, by multiplying quietly until they outnumbered the ghosts. This wasn't just nature taking back land. It was nature rewriting a story where no one expected beauty to grow, where no one planned for innocence to return, and where no one thought a place born of war could ever feel like peace again. These rabbits do not speak, they do not protest, but in their presence is a quiet message. A message that says, even in places where darkness once lived, life can return, not with a roar, but with a whisper. And sometimes, that whisper comes in the form of a small, soft creature, hopping through history, leaving behind not fear, but footsteps of hope. The origin of the rabbits on Okunoshima is surrounded by mystery, and this lack of certainty only adds to the island's allure. No one can say with absolute proof how they first arrived. Some theories suggest that the rabbits were once test subjects used during the island's chemical weapons experiments in World War II, and were released after the factories were shut down. Others believe that after the war, school children brought a handful of rabbits during a nature trip or school project, and when left on the island, the animals began to breed and multiply. There is also the possibility that rabbits were introduced intentionally in later years to add charm or curiosity to a place once shrouded in darkness. But regardless of how they arrived, what followed was something no one predicted. The rabbits found a safe haven in this isolated place, and with no natural predators, abundant vegetation, and relatively low human activity, they began to flourish in numbers. As time passed, the rabbits became the island's defining feature. Tourists and locals alike began noticing the unusual population growth, and before long, word spread. The island's history, once defined by chemical gas and military secrecy, was slowly being rewritten by the unexpected rise of a peaceful, thriving rabbit colony. The contrast couldn't have been more striking. These gentle, defenseless animals had taken over an island that had once been dedicated to destruction. They claimed no territory, waged no battles, and made no demands. They simply lived, and in doing so, they changed the way people viewed the island forever. It's important to recognize how this shift from secrecy to innocence happened so quietly. The rabbits didn't need a movement or media campaign. Their survival and growth spoke louder than any advertisement. Visitors began arriving not out of obligation or education, but out of curiosity and joy. They came to see the rabbits, to walk among them, to feed them and take photos. Over time, the island gained a nickname that would follow it across social media and travel sites: Rabbit Island. What had once been erased from maps was now placed back into global awareness, not through conflict, but through soft fur and gentle eyes. The unique nature of the rabbit population makes them unlike typical wild animals. Most wild creatures, especially prey animals like rabbits, are naturally afraid of humans. They hide, run, or freeze when approached. But on Okunoshima, the rabbits act differently. They approach visitors fearlessly, sometimes chasing after them in small groups, eager for a snack or simply curious. They hop up to strangers, tug on bags, rest in laps, and occasionally follow people as they walk. Their behavior is unusual and deeply affecting. Many visitors describe the experience as magical or emotional. There's something about being trusted so openly by an animal that strikes a chord in people. Something that touches on what we often lose in modern life: connection, innocence, and a moment of pure, unfiltered presence. These interactions have helped transform Okunoshima from a dark footnote in war history to a place of wonder. The rabbits, through no design of their own, have become messengers of peace. Their presence has sparked countless videos, travel vlogs, and personal reflections shared across the world. For many, a visit to the island becomes more than just a trip. It becomes a memory of simplicity and warmth. People leave not just with pictures, but with stories about a place where they felt unusually calm, surprisingly happy, and unexpectedly connected to something gentle. But the rabbits have also brought with them a sense of responsibility. Visitors are reminded to feed them safely, to avoid chasing or disturbing them, and to care for the island by not littering. The charm of the rabbits comes with the understanding that this environment is fragile, and that it exists because humans have, for the most part, learned to coexist rather than control. The unspoken agreement between the rabbits and the people is based on trust. The animals offer their presence, and in return they rely on human kindness to ensure their safety. The mystery of their origin then becomes more than a historical footnote. It becomes part of their quiet power. No one invited them. No one commanded them to stay. They came, they survived, and they shaped the identity of a forgotten place simply by being there. The uncertainty of where they came from only deepens the sense that their presence is something rare and special, something not designed but discovered. And in a world that often runs on control, planning, and explanation, that kind of accidental magic is a rare and unforgettable gift. The transformation of Okunoshima from a forbidden zone of fear to a gentle sanctuary of peace is one of the most compelling aspects of the island's modern identity. This change didn't come through government policy or a global initiative. It happened slowly, quietly, and organically. The most striking part of this transformation is the contrast. The island once manufactured chemical weapons designed to kill silently and efficiently. Those gases were created with the intention of destruction, meant to inflict damage that could not be seen and often could not be escaped. Today, that same land is covered in green grass, wildflowers, and filled with life that is anything but destructive. The island no longer produces anything deadly. Instead, it provides a space for trust, tenderness, and calm. Every inch of Okunoshima holds a kind of visual irony. The crumbling remains of poison gas factories still stand, though nature has softened their hard edges. Roots break through concrete floors, vines climb up rusted metal beams, and wildflowers grow in the cracks where once poison dripped. Visitors often walk past these ruins on their way to feed the rabbits, sometimes unaware of the horrors that once took place in those buildings. And yet, those same paths are now lined with animals approaching humans, not with fear, but with curiosity. In the same place where workers once wore gas masks and handled lethal chemicals, people now kneel down to feed small, soft creatures from the palms of their hands. It is almost surreal how the energy of the island has reversed. It is as if the land itself wanted to heal, and chose the quietest, most peaceful creatures to help it do so. This contrast between past and present makes the island even more emotionally powerful. It's not just a place where people enjoy nature. It's a place where life reasserted itself against the legacy of death. It reminds visitors that history doesn't always stay buried, but sometimes it can be rewritten. What was once a symbol of secrecy and warfare is now a symbol of innocence and openness. And this new identity was not forced, it was allowed to grow naturally. The rabbits didn't arrive with any intention of making a statement, but they made one anyway. Just by existing and thriving in a place that once seemed permanently broken. There is a kind of poetic justice in the fact that the animals living on the island today are completely harmless. Rabbits do not bite, sting, or chase. They do not build armies, claim borders, or seek power. They are prey animals by nature, always watchful, always cautious. And yet, here on Okunoshima, they act without fear. They have claimed territory not through aggression, but through peace. They've done what no army or government ever could, redefine a place's identity completely, without violence, without resistance, simply by living in it fully and without fear. People who visit the island don't leave talking about weapons, factories, or even the war. They talk about the rabbits. They remember the feeling of being surrounded by dozens of trusting animals, each one soft, gentle, and calm. They remember the quiet paths through the forest, the sound of waves in the distance, and the joy of being part of something that felt utterly innocent. This is the transformation that holds power, not just in what is seen, but in what is felt. It's emotional, it's healing, it's profound. This new identity of Okunoshima invites people to look at history differently. It doesn't erase the past or hide the horrors that took place. Instead, it offers a kind of peaceful rebellion. The island no longer serves as a factory of destruction. It has become a field of forgiveness, not through denial, but through rebirth. And while the old buildings still stand as silent reminders, they are now surrounded by life, vibrant, moving, and kind. The very act of walking alongside a rabbit where once soldiers marched is, in itself, a quiet but powerful transformation. The presence of the rabbits also reminds people that change does not always have to come from power or planning. Sometimes change comes from gentleness, from vulnerability, from the smallest forms of life taking root in the most unlikely places. The rabbits never needed to dominate the space. They simply filled it, slowly, generation by generation, until their peaceful presence became the island's new truth. This soft, quiet uprising of life against a legacy of death is not just a local phenomenon. It's a universal symbol of what is possible when life is allowed to return. Okunoshima stands today as one of the most quietly powerful examples of how nature can reclaim, redefine, and repurpose even the darkest corners of human history. Where once the air was filled with the stinging chemicals of wartime poison, it is now clean, still, and filled only with the soft rustle of leaves and the padding of tiny paws. The island was never formally cleaned or commemorated for its past. It was left, largely forgotten, to erode into ruin, but nature did not forget. Slowly it returned. Trees crept back into the open spaces. Grasses grew over concrete paths. Birds began to sing where silence once screamed. But perhaps most symbolically, the rabbits came. Not just to survive, but to flourish. They became the living spirit of restoration, populating every corner of the island and shifting its emotional atmosphere completely. The transformation didn't require grand gestures or political apologies. It happened slowly, through seasons, through generations, and most importantly, through life. The healing of Okunoshima was not orchestrated by scientists, architects, or cultural preservationists. It was led by the most unsuspecting force imaginable. Small, silent animals with no agenda, no voice, and no violence. The rabbits did not rise against the island's history. They quietly replaced it. In doing so, they became a mirror of what is possible when destruction is not followed by more destruction, but by gentleness. The peace that the island now represents did not come from an outside force imposing it. It came from within, from the land, from the soil, and from life growing where death once ruled. This natural transformation became a symbol far beyond the shores of Japan. Tourists and travelers who visit the island are often struck by how different it feels from what they expect. They come looking for rabbits, of course, but what they find is something far deeper. They find an experience that disarms them, that brings them into a quieter rhythm of existence. Without even realizing it, they step away from noise, speed, and modern pressure. The rabbits, in their silence, teach a lesson without trying. They move at their own pace. They live with trust. They approach without fear. There's something deeply moving about seeing an animal walk up to a stranger with complete vulnerability, especially in a world where both people and animals are taught to be cautious. The rabbits offer something no monument ever could, an encounter, a moment of genuine connection that doesn't need explanation. As more and more people began visiting the island, drawn by the images and stories circulating online, Okunoshima gained international attention. Videos of rabbits chasing tourists playfully down paths or sitting in their laps reached millions. But the real impact wasn't just in views and likes. It was in the emotional resonance. People didn't just see the rabbits as cute. They saw them as pure. In a world filled with uncertainty, stress, and violence, the idea that there existed a place ruled by peace, trust, and softness became almost mythical. The rabbits had become more than animals. They became quiet symbols of emotional truth. In a way, they gave people permission to feel again, to soften, to slow down, to care. Yet even as the rabbits attracted joy and wonder, they also demanded care and respect. Unlike animals in zoos or parks, these creatures live freely, and their well-being depends on human kindness and environmental balance. Visitors are reminded to feed them properly, to avoid leaving trash, and to be gentle in their interactions. The island, though transformed, remains fragile. The rabbits are not protected by walls or fences. They are protected only by the willingness of people to treat them with empathy. This relationship between humans and animals becomes part of the island's healing story. The peace is not passive. It is a peace that must be honored through action, through restraint, through mutual respect. As people walk among the rabbits and explore the quiet trails of the island, something begins to shift. The ruins of chemical factories are still there, cracked, hollow, and half swallowed by green. But they no longer intimidate. They no longer define the story. They simply exist in the background, reminders of what was. The present is defined by life, by movement, by softness, by shared space. The rabbits continue to thrive not because they were protected by power, but because they were given space to be. That is what makes the island so profound. It offers no loud answers, but instead invites a quiet reflection. That perhaps the most enduring kind of peace is the kind that arrives gently, without force, and stays simply because we choose to allow it. Okunoshima has become more than just a destination. It has become a living message. There are no loudspeakers or placards proclaiming its history, no dramatic monuments erected in stone. Instead, its message comes through the simplest of ways. The quiet gaze of a rabbit, the rustle of grass as they move through the undergrowth, the sound of footsteps echoing through abandoned factories, long surrendered to time. These rabbits do not speak, yet their presence communicates something deeply human, something words often fail to express. There is a power in their silence. In a place where lives were once destroyed by invisible gas, these animals now thrive openly, softly, in full view of everyone. Their existence is a gentle reminder that peace does not always come with ceremony. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a life that trusts, despite everything that came before. What makes the message even more powerful is its contrast. Rabbits are among the most vulnerable animals in the world. They are prey, fragile, always alert. In most environments, they must remain cautious, hidden, ready to flee. But on Okunoshima, they behave differently. They are calm, confident. They come to humans not in fear, but with curiosity. This trust is not a result of training or domestication. It has grown naturally over time. It reveals something profound, that an environment shaped by care, safety, and consistency can change behavior, even instinct. These rabbits live without fear because fear has not been reinforced. In a way, their behavior becomes a symbol of what the world might be if it nurtured trust instead of trauma. For those who visit the island, this experience often creates an emotional shift. People come expecting charm and cuteness. What they find is something more affecting. Many describe the feeling of slowing down, not just physically but emotionally. The simple act of sitting in the grass while a rabbit approaches without hesitation is more than pleasant. It's restorative. It reminds people of connection, of gentleness, of something deeply real that is often buried beneath layers of busyness and stress. It's as if the rabbits have not just reclaimed the island, they have reclaimed a part of our humanity. They create a space where people can feel again, without fear or performance, a space where vulnerability is safe. The symbolism of the rabbits continues to deepen when one considers what the island once represented. Okunoshima was a place of silence, forced silence, a place removed from maps so its dark purpose could remain hidden. The people who worked there were silenced by secrecy. The victims of the gas had no voice. The ruins today stand in silence, not by choice, but because the truth was buried. Yet now, that very silence has been repurposed. It is no longer a symbol of fear. It is a space for reflection. The rabbits do not speak, but their presence is louder than words. Their lives, so full and free, are a quiet defiance of what the island once stood for. They do not carry signs or banners, but they carry meaning. Even the way they interact with people adds to this unspoken communication. They do not demand attention, they do not seek to entertain, they simply coexist. And in that coexistence is a lesson, that peace is not the absence of noise, but the presence of harmony. The rabbits have no politics, no prejudice, no past to defend. They live in the moment, aware of their surroundings but unburdened by history. This purity of presence becomes contagious. Visitors feel it. They begin to move more slowly, speak more softly, and listen more carefully, not just to the animals, but to the space around them, and perhaps even to themselves. In this way, the island becomes more than a place. It becomes an experience, a moment of truth suspended in time. The rabbits, in their simplicity, teach without trying. They ask nothing but offer everything. And while they may not understand the island's past, they have become the guardians of its future. A future not marked by what was destroyed, but by what was allowed to grow back. In every hop, every twitch of the ear, every moment of trust, they echo a truth that many forget. Healing doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it's enough to be present, to be kind, and to carry forward a message, not in words, but in the quiet, powerful act of living freely.